The chandelier light hit wrong. That was the first thing Sorian Vale noticed when he walked into the Aurelius Hall that night. Gold everywhere. Crystal everywhere. Men in tailored suits laughing too loud, glasses raised too high, eyes moving too fast across the room, sizing up, calculating, dismissing. And not one of them looked at him. Not directly. They looked around him. Past him. Through him like he was furniture someone had placed wrong. The kind of thing you notice but don't acknowledge. The kind of thing that makes a room feel smaller just by being in it. Sorian kept his spine straight. That was the rule he'd given himself before walking through those doors. Whatever happened inside, spine straight. Eyes forward. No flinching. His shirt was already pulling at the buttons. 7 months. The weight of it sat differently now than it did even 2 weeks ago. Heavier. Lower. A constant reminder that his body was no longer just his. He pressed one hand against his side. Not out of nerves, but out of habit. Something that had become automatic in the last few months. A quiet acknowledgement. I know. I feel you. The hall smelled like aged whiskey and expensive cologne. Silk curtains pulled back on cathedral windows. Tall men with taller reputations moved through the crowd like they owned the air itself. Maybe they did. This was the Iron Veil Gala. The most exclusive gathering in 4 territories. Nobody got through those doors unless power vouched for them personally. Sorian had been vouched for. Once. Hi viewers, if someone you loved humiliated you in front of everyone and not one person stood up for you, what would you do? Drop your answer in the comments, I need to know. The whispers started near the east column. They always started there. That cluster of older alphas who stood like statues and talked like judges. He actually came. Someone should have told him. Does he not know? Sorian kept walking. He'd learned a long time ago that hearing something and reacting to it were 2 separate choices. He chose which one to make. The room was arranged in the usual hierarchy. Inner circle near the fireplace. Outer circle near the walls. And then, the space in between. The no man's land where people stood when they no longer knew which side they belonged to. That's where Sorian stood now. He scanned the room once. Methodically. The way you check a building before deciding whether to stay inside. Zyrick wasn't visible yet. That meant he'd enter last. He always entered last. Made the whole room turn. Made the conversation pause. Zyrick Thorne understood presence the way most men understood breathing. Automatic, unconscious, total. Sorian had once found that quality magnetic. Now it just made his jaw tighten. A server passed without offering him anything. A second one did the same. Sorian watched them both redirect toward other guests without a glance back. Not an accident. Nothing in a room like this was an accident. 2 men near the staircase leaned close and exchanged something quiet. One of them glanced over. Not at Sorian's face. At his stomach. Then back to each other. Then away. Sorian dropped his hand from his side. He wasn't going to give them the visual. The temperature in the room seemed to shift, not physically, but socially. That invisible pressure change that happens right before someone important enters a space. Conversations shortened. Postures straightened. Eyes moved toward the main entrance. The doors opened. Zyrick Thorne walked in. Black suit. No tie. The kind of controlled confidence that didn't need decoration. He moved through the parting crowd without looking at them, not out of arrogance, but because he didn't need to. He already knew who was there. He already knew what they'd do. He stopped near the center of the room. And Sorian, against every calculation he'd made, stepped forward. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just forward. 3 steps. Maybe 4. Close enough that the space between them was no longer anonymous. Zyrick's eyes moved across the room. Past the columns. Past the servers. Past the crowd. And landed on Sorian. Something changed in his expression. Not softness. Not recognition. Something colder. The room went quiet. Not all at once. Gradually, the way sound drains out of a space when everyone collectively decides to pay attention. Sorian didn't move. Didn't speak. Just held the eye contact. He'd rehearsed nothing. There was nothing to rehearse. He just needed Zyrick to see him standing there, present, visible, and not ashamed. For 3 seconds, nobody in that room breathed. Then Zyrick turned his head slightly toward the guard at his left. And in a voice that carried, in a voice that was designed to carry, he said, "Why is he still here?" The words landed like a dropped glass. Sharp. Irreversible. The guard stepped forward, not toward Zyrick. Toward Sorian. Nobody moved to stop it. That was the part that hit hardest, not the words, not the guard closing the distance, but the stillness. 40-something people in that room. Men with power, men with titles, men who built entire identities around the idea that they stood for something. Not one of them stepped forward. The guard stopped 2 feet from Sorian. "Sir?" One word. Flat. Professional. The kind of tone that made a command sound like a courtesy. Sorian didn't look at the guard. He looked at Zyrick. Zyrick hadn't moved. Still standing at the center of the room, one hand loose at his side, expression locked. The specific blankness of a man who had decided something and was just waiting for it to be finished. "You're going to do this here." Sorian said it evenly. Not a question. Zyrick's jaw shifted. "I'm going to do what should have been done weeks ago." The crowd drew back slightly. Not in protest, in anticipation. These were people who treated conflict like spectacle. They weren't shocked. They were waiting to see how far it would go. Sorian held his position. "Then say it clearly." Zyrick's eyes dropped, just briefly, to Sorian's midsection. Then back up. "That child," he said, "is not mine." 3 words. The gasps came fast. Scattered. Then silence sealed itself over the room like something had been compressed. Sorian felt it move through him. The sentence. He'd half expected it. Half prepared for it. But there's a difference between anticipating something and absorbing it in front of 40 witnesses while your body is carrying proof that the statement is false. He kept his face still. "You don't believe that," Sorian said. "I believe exactly what I said." "Then you're lying to everyone in this room. Including yourself?" Something flickered in Zyrick's eyes. Gone fast. Controlled. He looked away first, not out of doubt, but out of decision. He was done with the conversation. "Remove him," he said to the guard. Then to the room. "This conversation is over." But Sorian spoke again, not loudly, just clearly, into the silence. "I didn't come here for you to acknowledge me. I came here so every person in this room could see exactly who you are." Nobody answered. Nobody defended him. The guard placed a hand lightly on Sorian's arm. Not rough. Just firm. The kind of contact that meant, this is happening whether you cooperate or not. Sorian looked around the room one last time. 40 faces. All of them watching. None of them speaking. He walked toward the exit on his own, didn't wait to be guided, didn't give the guard the satisfaction of escorting him. He moved through the parting crowd, and they let him pass the way water lets something sink. At the main doors, he stopped. He didn't turn all the way around. Just his head. Just enough. His voice was quiet. Steady. Like a man who'd already made a decision he hadn't shared yet. "You'll regret saying that." Nobody responded. The doors opened. He walked out. Behind him, the crowd exhaled. And Zyrick. Zyrick almost smiled. Like it was already over. Like Sorian Vale was already gone. He had no idea. The rain started before he reached the bottom step. Not the dramatic kind, no thunder, no warning. Just the sky opening quietly, the way it does when it's not performing anything. Cold and direct and indifferent. Sorian kept walking. The Gala behind him was already resuming. He could hear it, the low thrum of conversation returning to normal, glasses clinking, someone laughing near the east window. That was the thing about rooms like that. They didn't grieve disruption. They absorbed it and moved on. He pressed his coat tighter around himself. One arm wrapped across the front. Not dramatically, just protective. The kind of hold that had become second nature. His shoes hit wet pavement. The street outside the Aurelius Hall was lined with black cars, most of them idling, drivers waiting on men who wouldn't leave for another 2 hours. None of the drivers looked at him. He didn't have a car waiting. He'd come here on his own terms. He'd leave the same way. The rain picked up. Not violent, just consistent. The kind that soaks through before you realize it's doing damage. His shirt was already damp at the shoulders when he reached the end of the curved driveway and turned onto the main road. No destination. Not yet. Just motion. He thought about Zyrick's face, not when he said the words, but 1 second before. That flicker. The thing that crossed his expression right before the mask locked back in place. Because Sorian knew that face. Had studied it for 2 years. Had learned exactly which muscle moved when Zyrick was calculating versus when he was feeling. That wasn't calculation back there. That was fear dressed in contempt. Which meant Zyrick already knew the truth. Which meant this was never about doubt. It was about control. Sorian stopped walking. He stood in the middle of the wet sidewalk and let himself feel it, not the anger, not the hurt, but the thing underneath both of them. The specific weight of being someone who was used as a liability instead of protected as a person. He allowed himself exactly 4 seconds of that. Then he started walking again. The street ahead was mostly empty. Street lights blurred through the rain. A corner store to his left, lights still on. 2 blocks ahead, the road bent into a quieter stretch, less traffic, less noise. He turned into it. His coat was fully soaked now. His breathing had evened out. The kind of calm that comes after something breaks, not before. He'd learned the difference. Then headlights. Not 1 set. 3. A black convo materialized slowly from the far end of the block. Moving at half speed. No urgency. Like it had been driving at this pace for a while. Sorian registered it the way he registered most things, noted, filed, not reacted to. But the convoy slowed. And stopped. Right beside him. No honking. No window rolling down. Just stopped. The rear door opened first. Then the 2 doors behind it. 3 men stepped out. And they were identical. Same height. Same build. Same posture. Same controlled stillness in the way they stood. Different details, one in a charcoal coat, one in all black, one in navy, but the same baseline. Like copies made from a single, very deliberate original. They didn't approach him. They just stood there, in the rain, watching him. None of them spoke for a full 5 seconds. Then the one in charcoal. His eyes, the sharpest of the 3, looked at Sorian the way a person looks when they already know the answer to the question they're about to ask. He didn't ask anything. He just said quietly to the others, "He's the one." Nobody explained anything. That was the first thing Sorian noticed. They didn't give him a reason. Didn't offer a speech, didn't lay out intentions. The one in charcoal simply stepped aside and gestured toward the open car door. No command. No pressure. Just an option, offered cleanly. And something in the quality of that silence felt different from every other silence Sorian had walked through tonight. He got in. The drive was 40 minutes. Nobody spoke. Sorian sat in the middle row, the three of them distributed across the seat ahead and behind him. The rain streaked the windows. The city thinned out. Then disappeared. What replaced it was different. Not rural, controlled. Gates. Long paved roads lined with low lighting. The kind of property that didn't need to announce itself. The main building came into view slowly, wide, dark stone, every window either lit or shuttered. Not a home that performed wealth. A structure that had simply accumulated it. They took him inside without ceremony. The entrance was clean. Minimal. A staff member appeared, male, quiet, efficient, and led Sorian down a hallway before he had time to process the architecture around him. A room. Clean towels already laid out. A change of clothes, which, and this was the part that registered, were already in the right size. He stood in the center of that room for a long moment. Then he changed. When he came out, the one in charcoal was waiting. "I'm Kaylee's," he said. Then, without pointing, "Drex. Oren." The other two were visible down the hall. One seated, reading something. One standing near a window, back to the room. "Kaylee's Rune," Sorian said. Kaylee's didn't confirm or deny it. Just watched him. "You already know who I am," Sorian said. "Yes. Then you know why that room just threw me out." "We know more than that." That landed differently than expected. Not like a threat. Like a statement of fact from someone who had done his reading in advance and wasn't trying to perform it. Sorian studied him. Kaylee's was the most direct of the three, that was already clear. Not warm, but not cold. Precise. The kind of man who didn't waste words because he'd already calculated which ones mattered. "What do you want?" Sorian asked. "Right now. For you to eat something and let the medical team check in." That was not the answer he'd expected. He didn't argue. The medical check was brief. A doctor, no unnecessary questions, no visible judgment, confirmed what Sorian already knew. Healthy. Stable. On track. The only moment of silence came when the scan image refreshed on the monitor. The doctor's expression didn't change. But he excused himself after. A little too quickly. Sorian filed that away. He was shown to a room for the night. Quiet. Dark wood, clean linens, no excess. He sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the house around him. Different sounds than what he was used to. Heavier. More settled. He didn't sleep right away. He sat there and thought about three men in the rain who didn't explain themselves. Who had his clothing size. Who knew his name before he gave it. Who called a doctor before he asked. And somewhere in this building, a result was sitting in a folder. In the morning, Oren found him first. Not Kaylee's. Oren. He came in carrying a folder and set it on the table without sitting down. He was the most reserved of the three. Sorian had clocked that in the first hour. He didn't speak unless the information required it. "DNA confirmation came back this morning," Oren said. Sorian looked at him steadily. "And?" Oren opened the folder. He looked at the results. His expression, controlled, practiced, unreadable, shifted. Just slightly. He closed the folder. "This changes everything," he said. He didn't explain what. He picked the folder back up and left. 3 days passed. Sorian didn't push. That wasn't strategic, it was deliberate. He'd learned a long time ago that urgency was something other people used to control you. Demand answers too fast, and whoever's holding them gains leverage. So he waited. He moved through the house at his own pace, mapped its rhythms, watched the three of them operate. They were nothing like what he'd expected. He'd expected performance. The kind of authority that needed witnesses, sharp orders, visible deference, the constant reminder of who held rank. That was the world he knew. That was Zyrick's language. The Rune brothers didn't speak like that. They didn't need to. Drex ran the security systems personally. Every morning, before anyone else was visible, he was already at the monitors, not because he was required to be, but because that was how he processed the day. Sorian walked past the room twice before Drex acknowledged him. Not coldly, just focused. "You don't sleep much," Drex said on the second morning. It wasn't an accusation. "Neither do you," Sorian replied. Drex almost smiled. Touché. Oren was harder to read. He moved through the house like he was always calculating 3 steps ahead, which, Sorian suspected, he was. He gave information in pieces. Not to be manipulative. Just because he believed people should only receive what they could use at a given moment. Sorian found that both frustrating and oddly respectful. It was Kaylee's who actually talked to him. Not just directed at him, to him. On the third morning, Kaylee's came and sat across from him during breakfast and asked a question nobody had asked Sorian in months. "What do you need?" Not "what do you want?" Not "what are you planning?" Not "what did Zyrick do?" "What do you need?" Sorian looked at him. "I need to understand why I'm here." "You're here because you were in the rain at midnight, 7 months pregnant, with nowhere to go. That doesn't explain why you were watching." Kaylee's was quiet for a moment. "We've been watching the Iron Veil situation for a while. You became relevant when certain documents surfaced. The DNA. Before the DNA. That landed with weight." Sorian set down his fork. "How far back?" Kaylee's met his gaze directly. "Far enough." There was something in the way he said it, not ominous, just complete. Like a door that had been left unlocked but not opened. Kaylee's wasn't hiding from him. He was pacing the information. Making sure Sorian had his footing before the next weight was added. That afternoon, Sorian was sitting near the east window, the one that looked out over the lower grounds, when the sound came. It was small. Barely audible. A heartbeat monitor in the adjacent medical room. He hadn't asked them to set it up. But there it was. He walked in quietly. The room was empty. The monitor was running, not connected to anything yet, just set up and waiting. Ready for whenever the moment came. He sat in the chair beside it. For the first time since the gala, something in his chest released. Not relief. Not comfort. Just acknowledgement. Someone had thought about this without being asked. Someone had looked ahead to the moment he might need it and prepared. That was different. That required a different kind of attention than he was used to giving. He sat there for a while. The house was quiet around him. The monitor beeped steadily in the silence. And for the first time in weeks, Sorian didn't feel like something that needed to be managed. He felt like something that mattered. That feeling, new, unfamiliar, slightly terrifying, was interrupted. Not loudly. Oren appeared in the doorway. Folder in hand. Expression contained. But there was something different in how he was standing. "We need to talk," Oren said. "All of us." Sorian looked at him. "Now?" Oren nodded once. Drex's voice came from down the hall, quiet and direct. "Prepare legal restructuring." Sorian stood. Kaylee stepped into the doorframe behind Oren. And for just a second, before anyone spoke again, Drex looked at his brothers across the room with an expression that carried something Sorian couldn't fully name yet. Then Drex said, "We're not just protecting him." He paused. "We're rewriting ownership." The rumors moved faster than Zyrick expected. That was the first crack. He'd anticipated silence. Controlled silence. the kind that powerful rooms produce naturally after an incident gets absorbed and filed away. Instead, within 72 hours of the Gala, 3 separate sources had reported the same thing independently. Sorian Vale was alive. Not just alive. Protected. Zyrick was standing in his private office when the third report came in. He read it once. Set it down. Read it again. The Rune brothers. He knew who they were. Everyone in 4 territories knew who the Rune brothers were. But knowing a name and understanding a move are 2 different things. And Zyrick could not understand this move. Why him? Why now? Why Sorian? He sat down. That was already unusual. Zyrick Thorn did not sit down to process information. He moved. He decided. He acted. Sitting meant uncertainty, and uncertainty was something he trained out of himself a long time ago. But he sat. He picked up the report again and looked at the timeline. Sorian had left the Gala. Sorian had been retrieved, that was the word the source used, retrieved, within an hour. By the Rune convoy. Specifically by all 3 of them, present in person, which was not how the Rune brothers typically operated. They sent people. They didn't show up themselves. Not unless something was significant enough to require personal confirmation. That detail sat in the back of Zyrick's mind like a splinter. He ordered the investigation quietly. No announcement, no formal request. Just a name given to the right person, and an understanding that results would come back clean and fast. They didn't come back fast. They came back messy. The first layer was straightforward, Sorian's movements over the past 7 months, nothing Zyrick hadn't already assembled in his head. But the second layer was where the inconsistencies started. Timeline gaps. Medical records with restricted access flags he didn't recognize. Financial transfers that didn't match any account tied to Sorian's name. An illegal document, partial, intercepted, not yet fully executed. With language that made Zyrick read the paragraph 3 times before the meaning actually landed. Protective custodial transfer. Heir designation pending biological confirmation. He stared at that line. Heir designation. His investigator sent a follow-up note at the bottom of the file, short, carefully worded, the kind of language someone uses when they're not sure how the recipient is going to react. Biological confirmation has already been completed. Zyrick closed the file. Opened it again. There was one more attachment. A single document. No cover letter. No explanation. Just the header, clean, official, time-stamped, and below it, a sequence of data he recognized immediately. He'd seen the same format before. In his own private records. The genetic signature was unmistakable. His. He read it once. Twice. His jaw tightened. His hand pressed flat against the desk. He'd stood in front of 40 people, 40 witnesses, and said with complete authority that the child wasn't his. And the evidence had been sitting in a lab the entire time. The entire time. He whispered it before he could stop himself. That's impossible. But it wasn't impossible. He'd known it wasn't impossible since the night he said the words. He just hadn't believed the proof would surface this fast. Or that someone else would get to it first. The summit announcement came on a Tuesday. No fanfare. Just a formal notice distributed across all 4 territories. Clean letterhead, simple language, the kind of communication that doesn't need to impress anyone because its source already does. The Rune brothers were hosting. Zyrick read the guest list twice. His name was on it. Not as a courtesy. As a requirement. The language was specific, attendance expected from all regional alpha heads. Not requested. Expected. There was a difference, and whoever wrote that document understood exactly what difference they were making. He could decline. He thought about it for exactly 4 minutes, Then he confirmed. Because declining would tell the room everything. Declining meant he was afraid of what the summit would expose. And Zyrick Thorn did not communicate fear, not to allies, not to rivals, not to anyone watching from the outside. He'd walk in like he always did. Head up. Presence forward. Whatever was waiting, he'd face it standing. The preparation was different from his usual summit routine. He spent 2 nights reviewing the DNA file. Not because he needed to, he had the data memorized at this point, but because he needed to understand the sequence of moves. The Rune brothers hadn't just taken Sorian in. They'd built something. Quietly, quickly, with the kind of legal precision that didn't happen by accident. Someone had been planning this. For longer than Zyrick wanted to calculate. He arrived at the Rune estate the morning of the summit, and immediately understood the scope. This wasn't a gathering. It was a structure. Every major syndicate in 4 territories was represented. Men he hadn't seen in the same room since the last border renegotiation. Men who owed him favors. Men he owed. All of them here. The Rune estate was different in daylight than he'd imagined it. Wide. Quiet. Nothing performing anything. The architecture said, "We don't need your approval." He was directed to the main chamber. Kaylee's Rune met him at the entrance. No extended greeting. No hostility either. Just the direct, measured acknowledgement of one powerful man receiving another. "Thorn," Kaylee said. "Rune," Zyrick replied. Neither smiled. Kaylee stepped aside and gestured him through. Zyrick moved into the main chamber. The room was already half full. He recognized faces, received nods, returned them. He was performing, that was the right word for it. Performing normalcy while running a constant internal calculation. Where is Sorian? When does he appear? And what does this room do when it sees him? He took his position near the center of the room. The main doors hadn't fully closed before he heard it. Not a sound. Not a voice. A shift. The specific atmospheric shift that happens in a room when something unexpected walks through the door. He turned, slowly, because turning fast would give something away. And there was Sorian. Not hiding. Not hesitant. Standing in the doorway between Drex and Oren Rune, with Kaylee's 2 steps ahead. Not broken. Not diminished. Present. Composed. 7 months carried, then delivered, and whatever had happened in the time between the Gala and this room had done something to the way he held himself. Something had settled. Something had hardened. Zyrick went still. Not from shock. From recognition. The room noticed. Because Zyrick Thorn going still in a public space was not a thing that happened. He said nothing. Nobody spoke for a beat too long. Then Kaylee's turned to Sorian, quiet, unhurried, and said, "You don't have to face him." And Sorian, without hesitation, without looking at Kaylee's, kept his eyes on Zyrick and said, "No." One breath. "I do." The doors at the far end of the chamber opened. And from the anteroom, carried in by a staff member moving with extraordinary care, the child was brought into the room. Zyrick saw the child before he could prepare himself not to. That was the problem with preparation. It only works when you know the exact shape of what's coming. He'd braced for confrontation. He'd braced for the DNA file being referenced. He'd braced for Sorian standing across the room from him. He had not braced for the specific, physical reality of a child in that room. Small. Wrapped. Carried with the kind of careful attention that didn't perform anything. Just real. Zyrick's chest did something he didn't have language for. He locked it down in under 2 seconds. But those 2 seconds, in a room full of men who read silence for a living, were 2 seconds too many. He heard the shift before he saw it. Conversations cut short. Attention redirected. the full weight of the summit's audience swinging toward the center of the room like a compass finding north. He straightened, moved forward. The floor between them wasn't long, maybe 20 feet, but every step registered. Sorian didn't move, didn't step back, didn't look away. The child was now visible to everyone in the room. Not presented dramatically. Not used as a prop. Just present. Existing. The most undeniable kind of evidence. Zyrick stopped 6 feet away. For a long moment, he just looked at the child. Nobody in that room spoke. Then Zyrick looked up at Sorian, not in the way he had at the gala. No coldness. No performance. Something rawer than that, which he immediately tried to cover with authority. "What is this?" he said. Flat. Like a demand? "This," Kaylee said from his left, and his voice was perfectly, infuriatingly calm, "is a summit. With all parties present." "All parties," Zyrick repeated. "Yes." Zyrick looked at the three brothers. Then back at Sorian. Then at the child. He was doing the math. The room could see him doing the math. That was the worst part. These were men who made calculations for a living, and every single one of them could read the progression on his face. He turned to Oren. "You ran the test." Oren didn't answer immediately. He reached to the table at his right and lifted a folder, simple, flat, no ceremony, and placed it on the surface between them. "Read line 7, Oren said. Zyrick didn't pick it up, because he already knew what line 7 said. But everyone in that room needed to see him pick it up. He did. He opened it. He read. And the room, 40 powerful men who had collectively maintained perfect silence, stayed silent just long enough for the meaning to fully land. Then one of the senior syndicate heads near the back said, low and even, "That's a confirmed bloodline." No question in his voice. Just confirmation. Zyrick set the folder down. He looked at Sorian, and for the first time in this entire story, he didn't look like a king. He looked like a man who had made one enormous, irreversible mistake and had just watched the full cost of it get laid out in front of witnesses. "He belongs to me," Zyrick said. The words came out like a last move. The final card when every other option has already been played. The room felt it. Kaylee's tilted his head slightly. Not angry. Not smug. Just steady. "You forfeited that right," he said. And nobody in that room argued. The silence after Kaylee spoke was the loudest kind. Not empty. Full. The kind of silence that means a room has already decided and is just waiting for the conclusion to finish arriving. Zyrick stood in the center of it. He was still holding the folder. He realized that and set it down. Carefully. Like putting something fragile on a ledge, not because the folder mattered, but because his hands needed somewhere to go. Drex moved first. Not dramatically. He simply walked to the far end of the table and pressed a panel. A second display came alive on the wall. Not a presentation. Not a slideshow. Just 3 documents, clean and formatted and entirely unavoidable. Iron Veil Alpha Code, Article 14, Drex said. Public rejection constitutes an on-record declaration. Witness rejection, like the one at the Aurelius Hall, qualifies as documented abandonment under territorial law. Nobody moved. Which means, Oren continued, stepping forward and pointing to the second document, all hereditary rights default to the Omega and supporting custodians as named in the heir designation filing, which was executed 5 days ago. The third document. Oren let the room read it without narrating it. One of the syndicate heads near the east wall leaned forward and looked at the filing date. That was submitted before this summit was called, he said. Yes, Kaylee's confirmed. That mattered. This was important. Because it meant the Rune brothers hadn't built this case in response to Zyrick. They'd built it before he had the chance to reverse course. Before he could arrive with a strategy, a counteroffer, a renegotiation. The framework was already sealed. Zyrick understood it. That was clear in his face. He understood every layer of what had been done, and exactly how far ahead of him it had been constructed. The syndicate heads were looking at each other now. Not in confusion, in calculation. Reading the room, reading the legal text, reading what this meant for alliances they built around Zyrick's power structure. And one by one, without announcement, they stepped back. Not literally. Figuratively. The specific social withdrawal of powerful men who have just identified which side of a situation carries legal weight. Zyrick watched it happen. Every man in that room, men who had deferred to him for years, men who had benefited from his authority, adjusting their posture, their proximity, their eye contact. He'd seen power shift before. He'd never been the one it shifted away from. His political standing was evaporating in real time. Not loudly. No speeches, no accusations, no dramatic exit by anyone. Just the quiet, collective recalibration of a room that had just received new information and was already updating. He turned to Sorian. And this was the moment that the whole night had been building toward. Because Zyrick's expression had changed completely. Not anger. Not denial. Not performance. Desperation? The real kind. The kind that doesn't calculate before it speaks. He took one step towards Sorian. "Give him back," he said. 3 words. Stripped of everything. No authority left in them. Just a man asking for something he no longer had the standing to ask for. Sorian looked at him. And didn't answer. Not immediately. The room held. Sorian let the silence run. Not as a tactic. Not to punish. Just because what he was about to say had been sitting in him for months, and he wasn't going to push it out fast. It had earned its own pace. He looked at Zyrick. All the way at him, the way you look at something when you've finally stopped being afraid of what you'll feel when you do, and he spoke. "You didn't lose him today." His voice was even. Not cold, not warm. Just clear. "You didn't lose him at the Gala either." He paused. Just one breath. "You lost him the moment you chose silence over truth." Nobody in that room moved. "I was standing in that hall for weeks before the Gala. Every event, every meeting. I was there. And you made a choice. Every single time, to look at me and say nothing. To let the room decide what I was worth." Another pause. "That's not something that happened to you. That's something you built." Zyrick's jaw was tight. His eyes were fixed on Sorian with the specific intensity of a man absorbing something true that he wished wasn't. "I don't need you to understand that tonight," Sorian continued. "I don't need anything from you. That's the part you still haven't caught up to." He looked at the child. Briefly, the way a person looks at the thing they're most certain about, then back at Zyrick. "He's not a claim. He's not a loss. He's a person. And the people protecting him understand that. You never did." The room was absolutely still. Zyrick opened his mouth. Closed it. He looked, for just a moment, like he was going to say something real. Something underneath the authority and the ego and the calculation. Something honest. But the moment passed. And Sorian turned away. He turned toward Kaylee's, who was watching him with that same steady, unreadable expression, and then toward Drex and Oren, who were already moving to form a quiet perimeter around the child without being asked. Sorian walked. Not fast. Not slow. Just forward. The room parted. Not out of fear. Out of something more complicated than that. The specific deference given to someone who just stood in front of 40 witnesses and chose clarity over revenge, restraint over destruction, and walked away with everything that actually mattered. Zyrick stayed where he was. He watched Sorian reach the far side of the room. Watched the Rune brothers close the space around him naturally, without formality. Watched the child carried through the doors. Then a phone on the table beside him buzzed. He looked down. A message. Unknown number. 4 words. There's more you don't know. He stared at it. Around him, the summit was beginning to dissolve, men gathering documents, exchanging quiet words, moving toward exits. The room that had spent an hour arranged around him was now arranging itself away. He didn't move. He read the message again. Then he looked up, toward the door Sorian had walked through, and across the now emptying room. The Rune brothers were visible for just a moment. All 3 of them. And Kaylee's met his gaze. Held it. Then looked at his brothers. Something passed between the 3 of them, wordless, quick, the specific communication of people who have shared a secret long enough that it no longer needs language. Then they turned. And walked out. Leaving Zyrick in an empty room with a message he didn't understand yet. And the beginning of a question that was going to cost him everything to answer.